talking My Best Friend is a Vampire, and this is a 1987 movie directed by Jimmy Houston. It stars Robert Sean Leonard as Jeremy Capello, who is our main character, but I suppose the most recognisable names here will be a role for David Warner, who's kind of playing like a Van Helsing type, and you've also got a small role for Kathy Bates as well. Now, this is remarkably similar to the Jim Carrey film Once Bitten that actually came out a couple of years prior to this. Coincidence? Who knows? But what is the story? So Jeremy is a high schooler, a quiet boy, somewhat of a wallflower, you might say. You know, he's got a crush on this kind of nerdy girl. He's got this kind of best friend who is a little bit more kind of loud and brash than he is. And Jeremy works as a delivery guy for this kind of local grocery store. And one day he is tasked to go to this seemingly abandoned house. But in this house there is a beautiful woman who kind of seems to want to seduce him. And of course, she's a vampire. And ultimately bites him, and he slowly becomes a vampire himself. And he's got to deal with these teenage problems. The local girl, his best friend, his parents, but there's also a couple of vampire hunters on his tail. What'll happen? You'll have to watch and find out. So, let us discuss My Best Friend is a Vampire. Now, that title, to be honest with you, is a little confusing because it makes it feel like the movie's in the point of view of the kind of the best friend, which isn't the case. Our point of view character is Jeremy as the kind of the vampire. The best friend is just really a supporting character, to be honest with you. What can we say that works in this film? I remember this film, and I actually remember this is one of these films where I actually remember lines from it for some reason. Even to this day, and I watched it a long time ago, obviously on VHS, and I still remember kind of certain things about it. Some certain things are stuck with me. So obviously, it did have a little bit of an impact on me when I was younger and kind of watched this. I remember the license plate. He has his license plate on this car called Nightman or something, and a few lines here and there that I remember. So yeah, obviously I quite enjoyed it when I was younger. It's a film that is very, very 80s, and it's one of these movies that really haven't aged well by kind of today's kind of social political standards. There's kind of things here that you can kind of, it's quite amusing to watch, to be honest, this day and age, because it's one of these films that has all of these things. We've got animal cruelty, we've got homophobic jokes, we've got underage sex, we've got all sorts of stuff here, basically. That was very kind of casual, in the 80s. These things used to kind of happen, and it wasn't like a huge big deal, and people didn't really worry about that kind of stuff. So, but it is one of these films that seems to have a lot of that in this film. So watching it today, it's a different experience in some ways. But I've got to say, I still found this movie quite amusing. It's a very kind of upbeat film in a lot of ways. There's never any real kind of sense of danger or or kind of real kind of harm that will come to anyone. Even though this is classed as a horror comedy and we do have these kind of vampire slayers, it's purely played for kind of gags. It's not a spoof. But it's never it never leaned into its kind of horror roots, if you know what I mean. So it's a kind of a lightweight film, I feel, outside of some kind of like dated sense of humour. I think most people will kind of enjoy very kind of on a family affair to a certain degree, because it is very kind of lightweight in that regards. I actually kind of quite like our characters as well. I think the character of Jeremy is actually kind of quite a likeable kind of character, and they don't go too far in making him like stupidly kind of nerdy. I actually quite like the way they cast the kind of his female love interest. She looks genuinely kind of nerdy. It's not one of these kind of like ponytail and glasses jobs when they take them off and she's suddenly be like the most beautiful girl you've ever seen. She genuinely looks like kind of a nerdy kind of girl, which I kind of quite appreciated. And again, they don't make her stupidly kind of like nerdy and kind of odd. She's just really into kind of like classical music and things like this. So I kind of like that. There's lots of kind of fun smaller characters. We get this kind of vampire kind of coach who's trying to kind of like help Jeremy transition into a vampire, called Mordok, and again I quite liked his sort of character, and we do get some kind of amusing kind of takes on kind of vampire lore, slightly kind of changing things up, and you know, talking into, you know, turning into wolves, but they think turning into bats is stupid, for example. So there's some kind of quite amusing. I wouldn't say it's never kind of like laugh out loud funny, but it's kind of like hijinks. This is kind of like goofy hijinks. And if you've seen the movie Once Bitten, it's very kind of similar to that, to be brutally honest. There are certain things here that I feel the movie doesn't really explain. But there you go, we'll kind of get into that. But it's overall, it's a fairly consistent kind of like amusing film throughout. Never being kind of like balls to the wall funny, I would say, but always being quite kind of gentle, and you know, it'll give you like a tickle here and there, but it's never like laugh out loud, but always kind of pleasant, and I think always helped by, I think, some likeable characters with some you know, some fairly good performances, to be honest, and this kind of comedic kind of sensibility, things like that. And I did quite enjoy some of the kind of the take on the kind of the vampire lore here. David Warner kind of plays the sort of characters that he kind of always plays in these sort of things, and I couldn't help but feel he was influenced by, because he's got this kind of sidekick, and it reminds me of Gene Hackman's Lex Luthor, and his, you know, the kind of like I've forgotten the actor's name, Ned Beatty, his kind of like, you know, Otis, the kind of that kind of relationship reminds me of David Warner and his kind of like henchmen and stuff. So I think there's definitely kind of influences from kind of other media here. You know, it's a lightweight film. It's nothing too kind of heavy going here. What doesn't work, as I mentioned, there are some kind of like some things here that I didn't feel were particularly kind of well explained. It almost seems like Jeremy is fated to meet this vampire woman, and she's kind of like almost expecting him. It's never really kind of like explained why. She also reappears at the end of the film when she's meant to have been killed, and we don't know why. It's never really explained. So there's kind of a few things here that are just kind of like, yeah. Don't think too much about it. I don't want to go obviously into every single one, but a few things that just seem to be like, yeah, don't worry about it. So if you're looking for a legitimately kind of strong narrative here that kind of makes loads of sense and isn't going to kind of have these sort of, you know, silly kind of plot holes, then forget about it. This movie just is more about just the kind of like the laughs and things like this. I do think it is maybe a little bit derivative of other films, in particular, as I say, Once Bitten, but it's clearly taken influences from kind of other films before it, so it doesn't feel particularly kind of original, which may be why this movie isn't particularly, you know, well remembered. I don't think in that sense, because it never has much of its kind of own identity, so to speak. And I think the whole concept here of having this best friend who is, you know, the human having to deal with his kind of pal being a vampire, and like this, the kind of the title suggests, it makes it feel like it's a more of an important part of the movie than it actually is, because it doesn't really have much bearing on the actual plot, to be honest. It's not so much about how he's dealing with his friend being a vampire. It's just about this kid becoming a vampire. We've kind of seen it in like I've mentioned, Once Bitten, very similar to Fright Night Part 2, and other kind of movies as well. So I do feel that there was some missed opportunities there. It never really leans into too much horror. I don't think that the jokes are all particularly that funny, but it's certainly a time capsule taking you back to the kind of the 80s, and not only with the kind of sensibilities, but the kind of the fashion, the hair, and everything like that, and just the you know, it's a very typical 80s movie in the kind of the way it was made and things like this. It's watchable, but I don't think it's like a classic about any sense of the imagination. I still quite enjoyed it in actual fact, though. Like I said, I do remember a portion of this movie way back from the VHS days, so I'm actually going to give it a slightly above average score of 6. Have you seen it? What do you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.